Now let's talk about the stereotypes being used within the commodity model and who is excluded from this framework. So first, I want to really make sure that we highlight all of the various ways that this reduces both men and women to these very particular roles. So the commodity model defines a woman's moral worth and value wholly in terms of how sexually sought after she is and how little sex she has had. That is what her value as a person is based on. Hopefully at this point we are pretty good at recognizing and critiquing this kind of view. But I think what often gets left out is how the commodity model views men and masculinity. It views men as these sort of animalistic creatures who are always seeking out sex and who just can't be held responsible if they commit sexual assault. Now, this view of men is incredibly degrading. It is one of the most widespread views of men that we have in our society. We view men as always being driven by sex. This is the rationale that is used to justify so many things, ranging from the ways that sexual violence is normalized and dismissed to things like middle and high school dress codes under which girls can't wear tank tops because their shoulders will be too distracting for the boys in the classroom. So instead, girls get sent home. Remember, we're talking about kids. Girls get sent home from school so as not to distract the boys in the class with their bodies. So as not to disrupt the boys' learning and education because the boys, just can't help themselves. Obviously, these policies hurt girls and women, but they're also incredibly harmful to men and boys. This is such an offensive view of boys and of men. The idea that boys and men can't control themselves whatsoever, that they're just these sorts of animalistic creatures, is both degrading and dehumanizing. And being told that's what you are over and over is inflicting harm and trauma. Now, we don't even treat this view in any sort of coherent way, even though, again, it is entrenched and pervasive. If it were really the case that boys and men can't control themselves when tempted by that shoulder, then the reasonable response is not to give boys and men all of this social power and control in society. If boys and men really are so unable to prevent themselves from assaulting people, then the appropriate response would be to lovingly and empathetically contain and care for them somewhere safe where they're not able to assault other people. And certainly not to let them roam free like a hungry lion in a city. And definitely not to let that lion make laws. Now, I do want to be very clear. This is a terrible strategy. I am not advocating for locking up boys and men. Both very specifically because carceral systems do not tend to make things better, and because this view is based on false premises. Boys and men are not like this. Boys and men are people. They're not totally consumed by desire for sex at all moments and just unable to control themselves as some kind of natural fact. To the degree that we see men acting in accordance with a commodity model of sex, it's because this behavior is taught. This is how our social world encourages men and boys to act. And being put into this role is not a flattering or a comfortable one. This view doesn't allow men to ever not want sex. It doesn't allow men or boys to ever be sexually violated. And that is such a serious erasure. The commodity model of sex tends to reduce women to just their status as non-sexual gatekeepers, and it reduces men to this kind of animalistic, inviolable, sex-driven status, and we should just be absolutely outraged by this. Another problem with the commodity model of sex is who it allows room for. Note which genders I just mentioned. There's no space here for anyone whose gender isn't that of a man or a woman. It's this incredibly binary view. There literally just isn't space for anyone else. There isn't a role for anyone else. And even more, it's an incredibly cis-normative view. It assumes that the reason that men and women necessarily inhabit these kinds of roles is due to some kind of natural biological programming, right? So it holds the binary understanding that something about binary sex identities produce and determine one's gender, which then leads to, again, excluding anyone who does not have a cisnormative identity. There's no space for anyone else. It's also centrally a heteronormative view. Now, the whole thing is based off of this idea of men seeking sex from women, and the ways that classifies gay men and gay women reflects this. So it massively mischaracterizes what gay and queer sexual relationships can be, and instead draws on and reinforces deeply entrenched stereotypes in which gay men are viewed as hypersexual and gay women are viewed as just fully non-sexual. These stereotypes are robustly historically entrenched. I think we hear them a bit less frequently today, but they are very much still around, and they're very much still active in our world, even if we don't hear them voiced as often. So these stereotypical presumptions are built into the commodity model of sex, right? So under this model, relationships between men are always going to be thought of as hypersexual, purely focused on sex. And that's because under the commodity model, men are viewed as centrally pursuing sex, while women are assigned the role of gatekeepers. In a relationship between men, then, there are no women to act as gatekeepers, so there's never going to be anyone to say no to sex, or anyone who doesn't always want sex. So notice again how the commodity model doesn't allow for men to ever disprefer having sex or to ever be the ones who are being sexually violated. So it reinforces this massively hypersexualized and often predatory view of gay masculinity, and in contrast, it reinforces this incredibly non-sexualized view of gay femininity. Right? So under the commodity model, because women are viewed as being the gatekeepers, being the ones who are entire job is to say no to the sex, then that means that in a relationship between women, you're just going to have people saying no. There's never going to be anyone who is actually interested in having sex, and there's never going to be anyone who inhabits the role of actually having sexual agency to seek out sex or initiate sex. Both of these are offensive, socially entrenched stereotypes, which just flatly refuse to recognize any kind of personhood or complexity of gay men and gay women. But these stereotypes have been used to create and justify policies and institutional setups and the social treatment of gay folks. And as long as the commodity model of sex is widely held, then these stereotypes are going to continue forward, right? Both in what people believe, whether they voice it or not, and in how policies and institutions are set up. Now, the final point that I want to make sure that we at least have in our minds is the ways in which the whole commodity model of sex serves as a rape apology. It serves to excuse or minimize or justify sexual assault. The commodity model of sex is both incredibly pervasive in our social world and, it just shows up everywhere. And it's one of the pillars upholding rape culture and enabling and justifying sexual violence. Because it's so pervasive and entrenched, even folks who are trying to resist rape culture, even folks who recognize that sexual violence is quite bad, will often still fall into the commodity model sort of mindset or view of sex. And once we start paying attention, we can see this all over the place. It's just pervasive in our social world. So if we want to try to reduce sexual violence, if we think that, there might be ways that sexual and romantic interactions could go better or even be good, then it seems like one of the things we're going to have to do is to grapple with and perhaps dismantle the commodity model of sex.